My name is Shashmi Gasai and welcome to the Genetics About Me project. Today I'm going to be identifying a particular physical trait of a person I know and investigating how that trait is inherited. Whether you're a biology student or a ballet dancer, I believe that the information I'm about to share with you will be of great interest and can even be helpful. Now let's begin. So we live in a world of great biodiversity, and this diversity is applicable to us as humans as well. We all have different physical features that make us unique, from our height to our weight to the texture of our hair, the color of our eyes, and even the ability to roll our tongue, or having an attached earlobe or free earlobe. Now, these traits aren't coincidental and can be explained by the science of genetics, which not only explains how traits are passed on from our parents to us, but can also predict what traits our children could get, how certain diseases can pop up, and even why we display certain behaviors. This then brings us to the focus of today. The person you see in front of you is Brailey Vine. She is one of my really good friends and is currently a rising senior at Millsaps College. She has kindly consented to being my case study, so thank you again, Brailey, if you're watching this, as well as your family. And in this video, I'll be investigating how Brailey inherited her blonde hair color. Before we dive into this genetic investigation, I think it's important that I define some genetics terms first. So we have a gene, which is a segment of DNA that contains multiple nucleotides, which are basically nitrogenous-based molecules that help determine the characteristics that make us who we are. Another important term is an allele. So these are just different forms of a gene. So you could have a gene that codes for hair color in this case, like the MC1R gene. And so an allele would be basically a different form of that gene. So whether it's in a recessive state, a dominant state, or you can talk about blood type with ABO gene, and you could have AA, AO, etc. All of these other terms listed here are important, and I will bring them up when the time comes when they're relevant. So, in addition to knowing and understanding these genetics terms, it's important to actually be able to see them at the molecular level so that we can actually visualize the process. On the image to your left, you have an amplified view of DNA and what it's made of. So DNA is found in the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell that you can see. This is an animal or plant cell like ours. So because we're talking about Brailey Vine, who is a human being, this is an animal cell. DNA is made up of long molecules called chromosomes, and these chromosomes, as you can see, are thread-like structures which coil many times around, kind of like a shoelace sometimes, and they're coiling around proteins called histones that support the DNA double helical structure. And so the image to your right is the central dogma of molecular biology, which basically summarizes how DNA is converted into a functional product through DNA replication, transcription, and then eventually translation. Because the whole point of gene is that it's a segment of DNA that codes for a specific protein or RNA molecule. And functional product basically means DNA instruction that helps us develop, survive, or reproduce. So because we're talking about hair color, we're talking about development. Now that we're acquainted with the basics of molecular biology that makes us who we are, it's time to study Brailey's family. So right in front of you, you see her family tree, her paternal side or maternal side, and the different members of her family. So you can see her grandparents from both sides, and you can see across 3 generations. The first generation are her grandparents, second generation are her parents, as well as their siblings, so her aunts and uncles, and then the last generation is Brailey along with her 3 siblings. And so her fathers, Benny and Heidi, are her parents who made her and her siblings, obviously. And the different highlighted colors around the names of the family members basically is the hair colors that they have, at least when they were born. And so in the image right in front of you, you see a sketch of Brailey's family tree, but in the form of a genetic pedigree. This is how geneticists determine a person's genotype, which, as I mentioned earlier, are the set of alleles a person has for a particular trait. Brailey's genotype is what will explain our mode of inheritance. Now, genes are passed down to us from our parents in the form of alleles. So, Brailey's blonde hair genotype will have one allele from her dad and one from her mom. Let's consider capital B to be the dominant allele representing dark hair color and small letter b to be the recessive allele representing blonde hair color. The recessive allele only shows up in the absence of the dominant allele. Hence, Brailey's father must have had the genotype small letter b for the hair color and had blonde hair. Though, even after he became a brunette later on because he's brown now, he had the blonde hair gene in his DNA when he was born, and he still has it. So now Brailey's mother must have received a small letter B allele from her maternal grandfather. Thus, during conception, Brailey received both the allele of small letter b, one from her father, one from her mother, and had blonde hair. If Brailey's inheritance was autosomal dominant, Brailey's brother Britton would either be blonde himself or be a carrier for the blonde hair gene, which he isn't, and one of the other sisters would have to be brunette as well. Hence, Brailey's mode of inheritance is autosomal recessive. Now, a question some of you might have is, why do people's hair color change from blonde to brown/black? Well, hair color is determined by the amount of a pigment called melanin. There are two types, eumelanin and pheomelanin. The amount of each that you have determines your hair colors. So lots of eumelanin makes black hair, moderate is brown hair, very little eumelanin is blonde hair, and mostly pheomelanin with a little eumelanin is red hair. Researchers speculate that certain hair pigment proteins are activated as children grow older, perhaps in response to hormonal changes that occur near or before puberty. Eventually, almost everyone's hair turns gray as our hair follicles lose their ability to make melanin. Thank you.